Fate Fox Blade 02. Recognition. Tamamo was normally a very happy fox. Her eyes shone with excitement, her fluffy tail bushed up and wagged at the slightest provocation, and her ears were very expressive and energetic. She was also doubly happy when she was paired up with someone on an isekai adventure, as she often was. It was with the whim of the gods that she found herself traveling from world to world, telling her stories and sharing her happy, fluffy self with all those around her. So why was it that her latest partner was so utterly inept and unwilling to take up the role that was temporarily needed of him until he was either dismissed by her goddess or he was gifted a more interesting life? Maybe something that would be a little more his speed at least. Yet, while Tamamo continued to take glances at Archer, said man cocked his head as he finally took notice of the attention. "Is there something on my face?" Archer whispered over to Tamamo. Tamamo checked quickly, finding nothing but a stone-faced expression. His eyes slightly squinted at her for some reason. She noted it for later, but she had more important things to think about. "You should definitely find a way for us to brush our teeth later." Tamamo deflected his worries politely, without actually telling him that she thought he was a little dumb. "We don't want to lose any teeth while we're here." One of Archer's eyelids made a slight spasm. "I'm fairly certain that it's not even possible for us to even get cavities," Archer replied gruffly. "Besides, I think we have more important things to worry about besides our teeth right now." "I wouldn't be so certain about that, Go-Shujin-sama," Tamamo sighed, "but I suppose you're at least correct about there being more important things at the moment." As soon as she said that, they were brought before a set of doors, and their presence was announced to the Lord inside of the building. Someone they must have figured was rather important, based on the way they held themselves at the ready, seeming rather twitchy every time her tail made the slightest flicker of movement. She couldn't exactly help that her fluffy appendage was rather expressive. She was just excited for a new start. "Lord Arcades, may I present 2 traveling mercenaries who helped to almost single-handedly repel the Beastman invasion, Archer and Tamamo," Amon introduced with a gracious bow. Said Lord gave the pair an inquisitive gaze, though he kept whatever thoughts he had about the pair to himself. At least that's what it seemed like. "Quite a unique pair you two are." Arcades looked over to Archer and asked, "Tell me, Archer, how did you come into this companionship with the Beast Woman? I was fairly certain that all of their kind are savagely violent to humans. Did you somehow tame the savage beast to a more manageable state?" Archer appeared to freeze, and Tamamo noticed the red-clad man worryingly glance over to her from the corner of his eyes. "She's my—" "I would say it's less that he tamed me, and more that I claimed him as soon as my goddess told me he was mine," Tamamo told the Lord with a smile. "That's not to say I put myself in a higher position than him, as he is my Go-Shujin-sama, but it does mean I will not willingly betray him so long as he remains faithful." "A goddess? Who might this goddess be, as I can't recall any Beastman religion that worships a goddess?" "Actually, I thought that they were just pure savages," Arcades questioned with a raised brow. "I come from a far-off nation known as Nihon, where the chief goddess is known as Amaterasu, goddess of the sun," Tamamo told him without missing a beat, though the slight bristling of her tail betrayed her annoyance at the situation. It wasn't as though she was mad at him. She was mad at the fluffy morons that ruined any chance of getting head pats and belly rubs for them all from the silly humans. At least the ones that happened to live in these lands for potentially hundreds of years. "Nihon? And what of you, Archer? Do you come from this land as well?" The question made Archer freeze in place, almost as if he was contemplating his answer. Then he finally decided to answer. "Yes," he answered in an almost stilted tone. "I come from the same land as Tamamo." Arcades leaned forwards in his throne with wide eyes. "Are you telling me that there is a land beyond the Minotaur nation and Beastman country? With living humans?" Not still directly attached to this plane of existence, no, Tamamo sighed, shaking her head at him lightly. But that is not to say it is particularly difficult for a goddess such as mine to facilitate transference between realms through Takamagahara, so long as she has gathered enough faith in the land and people to do so. Almost comedically, Arcade's both slumped in disappointment before his brows quickly shot up and his mouth went agape. He almost appeared like a dead fish. Oh, other planes of existence? Like the realms of the dead? That is but one of many types of realms available to the gods, Tamamo nodded sagely. However, there are an uncountable number that grow with every moment, branching off with every decision we do or do not make, and further branching for decisions made in other worlds within your realm. The worst part was she wasn't even making this stuff up, so it was very clearly honest when she said it, even if a bit much to take in. Hopefully she could get it all to sink in before he needed medical assistance, though. She was fairly sure that they wouldn't let her heal him herself, after all. For a moment, Arcades looked as if his mind was reeling from the revelation. Then, with a shake of his head, the ruler appeared to ignore what he had been told as he changed topics. Regardless, you both have saved the city. For this, you have my eternal gratitude. But I would ask if you two would be willing to offer your continued services in defense of the city of Ramstock? Tamamo tilted her head towards Archer, her tail swishing as it smoothed itself out entirely. If my Goshujin-sama wishes to aid you and your people, then I will assist him in his tasks, as is befitting of a wife. Archer ended up nodding his head. Will be willing to help protect the city of Ramstock. This got a smile from Arcades, who clapped his hands once. Excellent. Please, my servants will escort you both to one of the proper bedrooms for guests of an esteemed status. Following this, I'd wish for you both to join my men and I for filling dinner. Arcades gave a chuckle and added, I've no doubt that both of you are hungry after fighting this afternoon. Very much so, Lord Arcades, Archer answered with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Thanks for being so hospitable. No need to thank me, Archer. This is the least of what I can do to thank you and your wife. Arcades looked over to a maid standing to the side of the room and motioned for her. Olga, please show these two to their room. Olga walked over and gave a curtsy to Arcades before turning to the married couple. Please, follow me, honored guests. With this, she began to lead the two out of the throne room and further into the palace. Tamamo took Archer's hand in her own and followed the maid at a sedate pace, making sure to keep from losing her without hurrying the woman along unnecessarily. It also helped that she was better able to project an aura of loving wife when she could stick more closely to Archer like this, a small smile on her face as she took him away. To anyone looking upon them, it would almost seem as though she had hearts in her eyes and a complete and utter devotion to the man. Of course, she was willing to do what was needed and play any role to survive in the world they had found themselves in, no matter the personal cost. Archer gave a raised brow at the action, then glanced forwards to Olga leading them. Quite the nice palace you have here. It was easy to see Archer's steel eyes were focusing on each of the weapons decorating the walls of the castle. Likely, he was adding them to his reality marble. The castle has stood for over 228 years. It was one of the few remaining bastions from when the Dragon Kingdom was split apart into multiple lesser kingdoms, Olga answered without much excitement in her tone, almost as if she had given this answer repeatedly. Really? And what about the weapons I see upon the walls? From former members of the Asmati family over their many generations. Many have fallen over the years due to their duty of defending the rest of the kingdom from the beastmen. Olga looked back at the two with an indiscernible glance. Hopefully, you two will be helpful in pushing back the invaders, Olga said, while narrowing her eyes at Tamamo. Tamamo would normally bristle a little, maybe, at the constant racism, but she was well used to it by this point. Not to mention the fact that this nation was at war with literal furries. So even if she looked as though she was some form of beastkin or demi-human hybrid at the very minimum, she couldn't really hold it against them. Sighing gently, the pink-haired fox woman followed the maid until she brought them to where they would be staying for the night. It honestly was better than she expected at least, and she had certainly stayed in much worse conditions over her many lives, most of which she'd rather not remember, thank you very much. I will come retrieve you both when dinner is finally ready. Olga gave a small bow of her head and closed the door, leaving Archer and Tamamo alone. Archer walked around the room for a short moment, his eyes glancing around before he finally walked over to the single bed and sat down on the edge of it. "Okay, Tammy, mind explaining what's going on?" A blink, then two. The kitsune aspect of Amaterasu tossed a set of very specific talisman to the four corners of the room, before sitting down beside him with a sigh. I won't lie. This isn't the first time I've been dragged off by a goddess to do their bidding. It's just not Amaterasu that generally is the one dragging me off to other worlds, she told him, looking him directly in the eye. I will do my part and play the role I have chosen as well as I can to ensure your survival until Aiko either grows bored of you or until we get sent to a vacation world to relax and do normal things until she needs us again. Isn't that just wonderful? Archer groaned in annoyance. Then I assume we're going to be dealing with these beastmen for the long foreseeable future? Unless you wish to go back on your word, yes. Tamamo sighed. There really wasn't much we could do once you mentioned that you were willing to help out, besides, well, help. And he wasn't exactly going to stop us from leaving, but staying here for a short time and driving back their rivals will gain us their favor and faith, which will help us out a lot later. Guess I really am going to live up to Archer's mentality of being the reluctant hero. The red-clad man rested his back on the bed and gazed at the ceiling. At least I get some cool abilities from this mess. Sticking his hand into the air, a short and curved black blade covered in red hexagonal patterns conjured itself into his hand. Still, I really have to wonder where it is we ended up. They did say it was the Draconic Kingdom, Tamamo pointed out, pulling her tail into her lap with a sigh. And we were writing an AU of Vulpine spanner in the works. So... Archer took a deep inhale, then let it out. Depending on the day, we might be fucked if we are where you think we are. I have the power of the anime god on my side, the kitsune joked. I'll at least help you run away. And who says that your anime god is the only one around? If we are where you think we are, then we're going to have to get prepared. Figure out the limits of our abilities, see how our powers compare to the magic here, and probably get out of this country to one of a few different locations. But first, we need to get a map of the area to confirm our suspicions. With a flick of his wrist, the conjured blade disappeared from his hand, and he sat up on the bed. Yep, Tamamo smiled, glad that he was finally getting into the swing of things. I'll leave most of that to you because you are literally the author of that series, and I didn't get the chance to catch up before I got isekai'd with you. It was easy to see how stressed Archer looked at this point as he rubbed the middle of his brow. First, we have to figure out the area we're at, since the only dragon kingdom I'm aware of is way the hell away from the action. After that, we need to rush this protection duty and get our asses west. With a small smile gracing her lips, Tamamo nodded. It was perfect that he knew what he was doing, but the kitsune knew she would need to help him de-stress before he could accidentally murder the wrong person. Well, since I'm taking the role of your wife, she let her finger trail along the side of his jaw with a smile, drawing his attention to her face. I will take care of any nightly duties you wish of me when you need a moment to de-stress, just so you don't get too pent up and snap from the pressure when it's a really bad time. Archer shook his head. Now is really not the time, especially when I barely even know you. As if Archer was afraid that he may have insulted her, the red-clad man added, "Don't get me wrong, you're very beautiful, but there needs to be more than that before I get intimate with another person. We just need to get through tonight, then figure out how to help these people quickly tomorrow." "Just figured I'd let you know that the offer is on the table if you need it," Tamemo told him with a grin, her fangs showing for just a moment. Amaterasu knows all too well what it's like to be too stressed and not have an easy outlet. After a moment, Tamemo shrank down into the form of a single-tailed fox and sat in his lap looking up at him expectantly. "I am also cute and fluffy, so feel free to de-stress this way as well." "Adorable," Archer stated in a sarcastic tone before patting the fox's head. "Now, we just have to wait for them to finally call us for dinner. Hope that isn't too long." With that musing, Archer remained silent as he continued to pet the fox. His expression was unreadable. Well, Tamamo was more than willing to do whatever she could to help him on this journey. In the end, this world would only last as long as he maintained an interest in it himself, and she was keen on finding out more about the world she found themselves in. If he pulled out before Aiko was finished with it, they would both find themselves in another world, starting fresh once more. Unless he was so utterly burned out that he couldn't bear to touch a work with her other selves again. But at the same time, she had a good feeling about this one. Hopefully it would last a good long while. Lord Arcade sat at the dining table with his commander, Aemond, 7 nobles of the Dragon Kingdom, with only 4 being residents while 2 were from the capital, and his wife, Elena. All of them watched as the 2 foreign mercenaries entered the dining room. Yet while the pair were quite odd in appearance, with the man named Archer dressed in his striking red and black armor, the stranger one was the woman named Tamamo. She was a beast woman, one with enough intelligence and class to actually communicate with humans, instead of acting the savage like her fellow demi-humans. If one were to remove the bestial traits, she would look the equivalent to a beautiful human noble woman. "Is that her?" Alana quietly asked Arcades while glancing at the new arrivals being led to their seats by Olga. Arcades nodded. "It is. She and her husband are the mercenaries that took on the army of the Beastmen by themselves and won with extremely strange magic and weapons." Arcades glanced between the 2 foreigners and added, "Beast woman aside, from what Aemond has said, it would be in our best interests to permanently retain their services." "Still, a beast woman? Why not simply retain the services of just the man instead and have her leave?" Elena questioned with a suspicious glance at Tamamo. As she is Archer's wife, he would likely leave with Tamamo if she were to be kicked out of the city. Besides, she apparently demonstrated great skill as a mage. We can use that to further repel the Beastman incursions onto our lands. Arcades finally turned away from his wife as the foreigners were finally seated. "Greetings, Archer and Tamamo. I'm glad that you both have arrived for the meal." He raised his goblet of wine to the pair and smiled. The rest of dinner guests raised their goblets in solidarity with Arcades. Archer looked uncomfortable with the greeting, something that Arcades assumed was due to the mercenary's reserved nature. That was the complete opposite of his wife. "Yes, thank you for inviting us, Lord Arcades." Tamamo spoke with a grin, sitting beside her husband with a brilliant smile shining on her face. If she was to say she had been blessed by her goddess to have a smile as bright as the sun, he wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. "Yeah, thanks, Lord Arcades," Archer replied while glancing around the table. With a clap of his hands, Arcades called out, "Bring out the food!" Following this command, the servants went to work bringing in the meal, which consisted of steaks cut from a ram, potatoes, carrots, and white bread. Once the plates were set before each dinner guest, Arcades dug in and the other dinner guests soon followed. Clasping her hands together in prayer for a minute, Tamamo whispered, "Itadakimasu," before cutting her food into tiny bites and eating it respectfully. She was clearly well used to eating with nobles, as she matched him in pace so as to not be finished before he was, but also not keep him waiting. She also seemed to glow lightly as she ate, which could mean many things. Considering her prayer earlier, however, it likely wasn't anything he needed to be wary of. In comparison, Archer appeared to be from a common background as he simply ate without care for pace. That made Arcades quite curious as to their backgrounds. Finally, he decided to speak up. "Tamamo, you and Archer are traveling mercenaries, yet you seem to have a refined sense of etiquette. Might you be willing to tell me a little more of your background?" It's not really that interesting of a topic, but I once served at a shrine dedicated to Amaterasu, before I was conscripted as a concubine, so to speak, and again when I grew weary of court politics. Tamamo mentioned offhandedly. "I know the basics of what not to do as a result because of such a thing, but I would rather leave ancient history far behind me, if at all possible." Arcade's eyes widened upon hearing this. Concubine, you say?" Tamamo nodded her head, allowing him to see the discomfort on her face at that subject before clearly settling into a dreamy smile as she looked at her husband. "Yes, but at the very least, when I returned to the shrine, I was gifted a much more satisfying husband who happened to share my passion for the written word after a while of dedicated service to my goddess." I see. Arcade sipped on his wine, mulling the odd history of Tamamo's. Setting his goblet aside, he then looked over to Archer. "What about you, Archer? From what Aemond has said, you appear to have some strange magic that allowed you to conjure a bow and arrows." The red-clad man seemed slightly surprised at the question, with a fork still in his mouth. Biting the ram's meat off his fork and swallowing, Archer finally answered, "They technically weren't arrows." Arcade's brow rose at the admission. "If not arrows, then what are they?" "Swords." "Swords?" Aemon suddenly questioned. Archer slowly nodded. "Swords." He then held his hand out, and a strange, black, curved short sword of foreign make appeared in his hand. "I can conjure them and alter their properties if I so wish." In demonstration, the sword twisted and elongated until it became the length of 4 feet. Depending on the blade I used to fire, different effects can occur. "And that was the blade you used to fire at the beastman?" Aemon asked, with interest heavy in his voice and body language. Archer shook his head, dispelling the altered blade in a burst of particles. It was another sword known as Hrunting. "Are they the only blades you can conjure? And in addition, is there a limit to the amount you can make or the time that they would last?" Arcades quickly understood what the commander was interested in. If this archer could create an entire arsenal of weapons that could be given to the soldiers, then the tides of battle could potentially be made permanently in their favor. I have thousands of blades that can be created, some mundane, some magical, some of untold power and destruction, and Archer appeared to think about it. "I'm fairly certain that the blades would last as long as I wish them to." Arcades and Aemon shared a look, then glanced back to Archer. At the same time, the dinner guests could be heard muttering as they also followed the pair in observing the mysterious mercenary. Finally, Arcades broke the tentative silence. "Archer, would you be able to conjure up weapons for our troops to utilize against the beastmen? We'd be willing to handsomely reward you for such a service." "I would also make the same request, Archer," one of the nobles, Palladia, inquired of the mercenary. "Ardengate is always in need of good steel and powerful weapons to turn back the hordes of minotaurs and beastmen." Slowly, Archer deliberated the choice as he took another bite of ram's meat. Then he looked over to Tamamo and quietly asked her a question. The weapon conjurer's wife nodded at him, giving him a thumbs up as she discussed with him quietly about what they could offer. Archer then looked back to Arcades. "I would be willing to create weapons for your defense, though I'm uncertain on the currency of this land. How much would a magical weapon cost normally?" "It could cost tens to thousands of gold or platinum to buy a magical weapon, depending upon the strength of its enchantment," Aemond replied, giving Archer a moment to contemplate. "What about a quality steel blade?" It would be 5 silver, all the way up to 1 gold that is the equivalent of 10 silver for a regular blade. Both Aemond and Arcades had no idea as to where Archer was going with this, especially because normal steel weapons shouldn't have any comparison to that of magical items. I am willing to create an arsenal of hrunting for the cost of 3 silver each. The jaws of every noble at the table, with Aemond included, dropped at the beyond discounted price that Archer named. Its ability makes any user create the most optimal slashes possible to draw blood. Upon tasting blood, hrunting will strengthen the user and grow in size. No one at the table spoke for some time, their minds going through the possibility of hundreds, if not thousands, of these blades for an absolute pittance. "I will buy 500 from you immediately." Aemond's declaration seemed to call everyone else to action. "I will take 400, Palladia added immediately after. 600, another noble Pirou shouted. 1,000! Arcades finally gave his order. With the meal utterly forgotten, the guests at the table were in rapid talks with Archer over the logistics of supplying their orders, followed by the payments that would be owed. As most of the guests lacked the payments on hand, they offered writs of payment to be paid out at each city throughout the kingdom. Yet while most of the other nobles seemed to care about arming their soldiers, Arcades thought about the profit that could be made from trading some of the armaments that Archer made to other countries, such as the Slain Theocracy or Baharuth Empire. Regardless, Arcades considered this to be one of the most profitable dinners he's ever had in his castle.